elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and Linda stepped out into a silence so complete it felt deliberate. There was no waiting area cluttered with magazines. Just a wide, open space with floor-to-ceiling glass on every side, and soul spread out below like something from a life she hadn't earned yet. She tightened her grip on her laptop bag. Kelvin stepped out behind her, his hoodie pulled halfway over his head, earphones resting around his neck instead of in his ears, which meant he was paying attention, even if he didn't want her to know. "You said you were dropping me at Aunt Sepha's," Kelvin muttered, glancing around. "She canceled," Linda replied without looking at him. "So you brought me here," he said. "I couldn't leave you alone in the apartment, Kelvin." He scanned the penthouse foyer the way teenagers looked at expensive things, with deliberate indifference. "This guy writes code," Kelvin said, tilting his head slightly. "Or collects cloud real estate?" Linda didn't answer. The man himself had just stepped out of a corridor to the left, and every prepared sentence she had dissolved somewhere between her throat and her mouth. Kwon Ji-ho was 32, according to the brief she had read. The photographs had shown a composed man in tailored suits at tech conferences. The man standing in front of her now wore gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt with a faint coffee stain near the hem. His glasses sat slightly crooked on his face. He was tall. That part the photographs had gotten right. His eyes lingered briefly on her laptop bag, his attention already half elsewhere. "You're the translator," Ji-ho said flatly. "Yes," Linda replied, steadying her voice. "Linda Asante. And this is my son, Kelvin. I apologize for bringing him. It was a last-minute situation." Ji-ho's gaze shifted to Kelvin. Kelvin met it, his expression guarded, already expecting disappointment. "How old are you?" Ji-ho asked. 16, Kelvin answered. Ji-ho gave a single nod, as if filing that away, then turned without another word and walked back down the corridor. Linda took that as an invitation. "Come," she said quietly, pulling Kelvin along with a look that left no room for argument. The office they entered was something else entirely. 3 walls of glass. A desk that looked like it cost more than her yearly rent. 2 monitors running streams of code she only partially recognized. The one solid wall was lined with shelves, not books but small framed circuit boards, each labeled in Korean. The air carried a faint mix of coffee and metal. A working space. Ji-ho sat behind the desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a thick manuscript and placed it in front of her. 32 chapters, he said. "I need the English version to read like I wrote it in English." "I'll need the digital files as well," she said, already pulling out her laptop. "And access to any technical terminology guides your team uses. I want the language consistent with how you speak publicly." "My assistant will send those," Ji-ho replied. Linda nodded, then added, "Also, I'd like to do a few recorded conversations with you as we go. Translating a biography is different from translating a document. I need to understand how you think before I can accurately reflect your voice." Ji-ho's expression shifted, subtle but noticeable. "I agreed to the translation," he said. "Not interviews." "It's not an interview," Linda clarified calmly. "Think of it as context." He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. Behind them, Kelvin, who had been leaning near the doorway pretending to scroll through his phone, drifted quietly down the corridor. Linda noticed. She said nothing. Instead, she gave him 5 minutes. She got 4. A sound echoed faintly from deeper inside the apartment, the distinct click of a door being tested and opened. Ji-ho's head lifted. Linda glanced toward the hallway. "Is there something down that corridor I should be worried about?" she asked carefully. Ji-ho was already on his feet. They found Kelvin in a dim room that was neither office nor bedroom. The only light came from a long server rack along the wall, its blue LEDs blinking in quiet patterns. Kelvin stood in front of it, phone raised, taking pictures with focused intensity. "Kelvin," Linda said, her tone flat. "This is a private server cluster," Ji-ho said from behind her, his voice calm. "Informative." Kelvin lowered his phone, unfazed. 4 terabytes of local storage, he said, glancing at the setup. "You're not using the cloud for your main operations." "No," Ji-ho replied. "It's because of the data breach in 2021, right?" Kelvin asked. The silence that followed shifted. "You know about that?" Ji-ho asked. Kelvin shrugged. "I read about Quantech when my mom told me about the job," he said. "Your lead engineer sold user data through a third-party app. You rebuilt everything from scratch after." A brief pause. "I would have done the same," Kelvin added. Ji-ho watched him more closely now. "What do you know about infrastructure?" he asked. Enough, Kelvin said. I'm building a game. The back end is what's breaking me. What language are you using? Jiho asked. Python, Kelvin answered. But I'm thinking of switching to Rust for performance. Don't switch yet, Jiho said immediately. Your bottleneck is probably architecture, not language. Kelvin blinked, caught off guard. It was the first time all day he looked at an adult without that thin layer of dismissal. How do you know it's architecture? Kelvin asked. Because it's always architecture at your stage, Jiho replied. Linda stood in the doorway, watching them. They spoke in fragments, code, systems, shortcuts. A language she couldn't fully follow. She cleared her throat. Kelvin, she said. Apologize for entering without permission. It's fine, Jiho said, cutting in before Kelvin could respond. His eyes were still on the boy. Show me what you have. Kelvin hesitated, glancing at his mother. Linda met his eyes. Don't make me regret this. He exhaled, then pulled out his phone and opened his project. Jiho sat on the edge of a storage unit. Kelvin stood beside him. They spoke in quick exchanges, overlapping at times, the rhythm of people who understood each other faster than expected. Linda left after 5 minutes. Back in the office, she opened the manuscript and began working through the first 3 chapters, letting their voices fade into the background. When they finally returned, Kelvin's hoodie was pushed back, his face fully visible. They had stayed in that server room for 45 minutes. 10 minutes later, Jiho walked them to the elevator and pressed the button. As the doors slid open, he looked at Linda. Same time Thursday? He asked. Thursday works, she replied. The doors began to close. Kelvin stepped forward, placing a hand between them to stop them. Hey, he said, looking directly at Jiho. You should fix the ventilation in that room. The servers are running warm. Jiho held his gaze. I know, he said. I ordered the part last week. Kelvin nodded once and pulled his hand back. The doors closed. In the reflection of the mirrored wall, Linda caught the smallest shift at the corner of her son's mouth. He was trying not to smile. So was she. Thursday arrived with a kind of gray sky that couldn't decide between rain and restraint. Linda came prepared this time. A thermos of coffee, the first 8 chapters annotated, and a list of questions organized by urgency. Kelvin came prepared too, which surprised her. He had brought his laptop and, more noticeably, had changed out of his most aggressively oversized hoodie into a cleaner, more fitted one. She didn't comment on it. She had learned that not commenting on things with Kelvin was the fastest way to make him undo them. Jiho opened the door before they knocked. He was dressed better than the first time, dark trousers, a fitted black top, and his glasses were no longer crooked. His gaze dropped briefly to Kelvin's laptop. Good, Jiho said. We'll look at the back-end routing today. Kelvin walked past him into the apartment like he had been there 100 times. Linda followed, exchanging a brief glance with Jiho. Barely a second, but it carried acknowledgement, adjustment, and something quieter beneath it. They settled into a rhythm. Linda worked at the long table by the window in the living room, soul stretching out behind her. Jiho stayed in his office for the first hour, then moved to sit across from her as they worked through the annotated chapters together. It was easier than she had expected. He was precise. When she asked what he meant by a phrase, he didn't give options. He gave one exact answer and waited while she wrote it down. She appreciated that. What she hadn't prepared for was 2 hours in when Jiho stood, stretched slightly, and said, I need a break. He had walked into the living room where Kelvin was sprawled on the floor, laptop open, one earbud hanging loose. Jiho sat down on the couch and, with complete seriousness, said, What's the vibe with the game right now? Kelvin looked up. Linda looked up. Jiho adjusted his glasses. I mean, he clarified, is it bussin'? The silence that followed settled heavily in the room. Kelvin turned his head slowly toward his mother, his expression carrying the exact kind of second-hand embarrassment only a teenager could experience. Linda pressed her lips together. Then Kelvin looked back at Jiho. Did you just? Kelvin started. I read that it means good, Jiho said, completely composed. It seemed appropriate. Kelvin blinked. Where did you read that? An article, Jiho replied. It was recent. How recent? Kelvin asked. Jiho paused, thinking. 2024. Kelvin closed his laptop carefully, as if he needed both hands free to deal with what had just happened. That word is on life support, he said. You can't just walk up to someone and say that. You'll get looked at. Looked at how? Jiho asked. Like I'm looking at you right now, Kelvin said flatly. Linda broke. The laugh came out before she could stop it. warm, sudden, unguarded. She immediately picked up her pen and looked down at her papers as if that would fix it. It didn't. Jiho glanced at her. She kept her eyes down, but the smile stayed. He looked back at Kelvin. What should I say instead? Nothing, Kelvin said. Just don't say anything. Normal people don't narrate vibes out loud. That's not useful advice, Jiho replied. It's extremely useful advice, Kelvin said. Jiho leaned back against the couch, recalibrating. Fine. Show me the routing issue. Kelvin muttered something under his breath as he reopened his laptop. Linda caught fragments, embarrassing and grown people, and took a long sip of coffee to hide her face. The morning moved steadily after that. Not fast. Not slow. Purposeful. Jiho shifted between them, reviewing Kelvin's code before returning to Linda's chapters, maintaining the same focus in both spaces. Around 6 in the evening, he ordered food without asking. It arrived 20 minutes later, Korean fried chicken, japchae, and a container of jollof rice. Linda paused, looking at it. You ordered jollof rice, she said. Your assistant mentioned you prefer it for dinner, Jiho replied simply. Linda looked at the container a moment longer than necessary. Kelvin reached for the chicken on his food. He has a personal shopper, Mum, Kelvin said casually. Don't read into it. I'm not reading into anything, Linda replied. Your face is reading into it, Kelvin said. She pointed at him. He grinned and said nothing else. By 9, Kelvin had moved from the floor to the couch. By 9:30, he was asleep, laptop balanced on his chest, one arm hanging off the side, mouth slightly open in that loose, unguarded way that came only after real mental effort. Linda walked over, draped a thrown blanket over his shoulders, and dimmed the lamp. When she returned to the table, Jiho was still there. He had a glass of water in front of him and the manuscript open, a pen in hand. She stopped. You're reading it, Linda said. I was checking your notes, Jiho replied. You have very neat handwriting, she observed, sitting down. For someone who types everything. He looked up. My mother insisted. She said handwriting reveals character. What does she think yours reveals? She says it looks like someone who thinks more than he speaks, Jiho said. Linda nodded. She's not wrong. Something shifted in his expression, subtle but real. He set the pen down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence held the city lights and the soft rhythm of Kelvin's breathing. Linda turned a page. The chapter about your father, she said. Chapter 7. I translated it 3 times, and I'm still not satisfied. The Korean carries a weight I can't quite match in English. The way you describe his silences. Jiho was quiet. He didn't speak much, he said after a moment. When he was proud of something, he went quieter, not louder. Most people didn't understand that about him. Did you? Linda asked. Not until I was older, Jiho said, looking at his hands. By then, he was already sick. Linda nodded slowly. She didn't rush to fill the space. I can find the weight, she said eventually. I just needed to know what I was looking for. Jiho looked at her then, fully. It wasn't about the manuscript anymore. The look arrived before he could stop it, direct and unguarded, lasting just a fraction too long. Kelvin shifted on the couch, letting out a half-word, half-snore. The moment broke. Jiho stood. I'll call a driver for you. We can take the subway, Linda said. It's past 9, Jiho replied. We've taken it later than this, she said. He held her gaze. Let me call a driver, Linda. She paused, then nodded. Thank you. While he made the call, Linda packed her notes, capped her pens, and straightened her papers. She glanced around the apartment, the city beyond the glass, the faint coffee stain on the mug. She was starting to understand the person who lived here. She walked to the couch and placed a hand on Kelvin's shoulder. Kelvin, she said softly. He stirred, blinking, disoriented for a second before recognition settled. He sat up and grabbed his laptop. Did I fix the routing in my sleep? He mumbled. No, Linda said. Shame, Kelvin replied, standing. He slid the laptop into his bag and zipped it. Minutes later, Jiho walked them to the elevator, just as he had before. The driver will be downstairs, he said. The doors opened. Kelvin stepped in, then paused and turned back. You should look up what base means, Kelvin said. Jiho tilted his head slightly. Does that one work? Yeah, Kelvin said with a shrug. That one's good. The door slid shut. Linda watched the floor numbers descend. She thought about a man who grew quieter when he was proud. About the way Jiho had said her name. Linda, not Ms. Asante, like it had settled into something familiar. She leaned her head back lightly against the elevator wall and looked up at the ceiling. Minutes later, the elevator arrived at the lobby. Outside, the black car was already waiting, engine running, the driver standing beside it with the controlled stillness of someone trained not to look impatient. Linda stepped out of the revolving door, Kelvin half a step behind her, still adjusting the strap of his bag, still blinking sleep out of his eyes. "Get in," Linda said, nodding toward the car. "And don't fall asleep." Kelvin frowned as he reached for the door. "Why not?" "Because you'll be impossible to wake when we get home," she replied. "And I'm not dragging you up the stairs." Kelvin climbed in without another word, which told her he was more tired than he wanted to admit. The driver closed the door with a soft, expensive click, then moved to the front. The car pulled into the Soul Night quietly. Kelvin lasted 7 minutes before his head tipped toward the window. Linda didn't wake him. She watched the city pass instead, lights blurring into long reflections across the glass, and, against her better judgment, thought about the penthouse. About the way Jiho had spoken about his father. About the quiet that had followed. The thought stayed with her longer than she expected. It followed her all the way home. The next 3 weeks settled into a rhythm that surprised her with how natural it felt. Jiho was not an easy subject. He gave information precisely, but sparingly. During their recorded conversations, there were moments when he would pause mid-sentence, choosing his words with the care of someone who had learned that carelessness carried consequences. But he was consistent. He answered every question she asked, even the ones that made him stop and think. And he always ordered jollof rice. He never mentioned it. It simply appeared with the rest of the food, every time, placed beside the Korean dishes as reliably as his glasses and the coffee mug he never replaced. Kelvin also came to every session. That hadn't been planned either, but Jiho never withdrew the unspoken invitation. Every few hours, Jiho would stand, walk over, and disappear into a technical discussion with him. Linda stopped trying to follow those conversations. Instead, she noticed something else. Kelvin laughed more in that apartment than he had in a long time. Not the polite laugh he used when he was tolerating something. The real one. The one that reached his eyes. In those 3 weeks too, Jiho made 2 more attempts at Gen Z vocabulary. The first was the word slay, used in reference to Kelvin's game design. Kelvin stared at him for a long moment before saying carefully, "You can't say that." Jiho adjusted his glasses. "It was used correctly." "That's not the problem," Kelvin replied. The second attempt was no cap. Grammatically, it was correct. Emotionally, it was catastrophic. Linda excused herself to the bathroom and closed the door before the laughter fully broke out. When she returned, Kelvin was looking at Jiho with narrowed eyes. "You practice these, don't you?" Kelvin asked. "Like you sit here alone and rehearse them." Jiho didn't deny it. Kelvin leaned back against the couch. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." But he was smiling. Behind her papers, Linda was smiling too. It was on a Tuesday in the 3rd week that Jiho's assistant finally sent the final batch of manuscript files. Linda opened the folder and immediately noticed something. 3 chapters were locked. Password protected. She had seen the gap before. Chapters 24, 25, and 26 had been missing. But she had assumed they were still being prepared. Now they were here, and they were completely inaccessible. She brought it up that afternoon. 3 of the chapters are locked, Linda said, glancing over from her laptop. Jiho didn't turn from his monitor. "Leave those." "I can't leave them," she replied. "They're in the middle of the biography. The chapters around them reference events that—" "Leave them, Linda," he repeated. She watched the back of his head for a moment. "Jiho," she said, quieter this time. "A biography with 3 missing chapters in the middle isn't a biography," she said. "It's a story with a hole in it. Readers will feel it, even if they can't name it." He didn't respond. He just kept working. Linda let it go. For that day. But she thought about it on the subway ride home. She thought about it while making Kelvin eat something that resembled a proper meal instead of surviving on the snacks from Jiho's kitchen. She thought about it lying awake at 11:30, staring at the ceiling while the city pressed quietly against her window. A man who controlled every sentence. And 3 chapters he kept behind a locked door. The following Thursday, Kelvin arrived ahead of schedule. Jiho had texted him directly. Something about a rendering issue in the game he had apparently been thinking about between sessions. They went straight to the server room. 20 minutes later, Linda arrived. She settled at the work table in Jiho's office this time and opened her laptop. The locked files were still there. Grayed out. Beside her notes lay a printed draft she had noticed the week before. Pages Jiho had taken from a locked drawer, reviewed privately, then set face down without comment. He had stepped out to take a call. Linda looked at them. Then she reached for them. She knew she shouldn't, but she read them anyway. The first page confirmed what she already suspected. These were the missing chapters. She began quickly, scanning out of habit, but within 3 paragraphs her pace slowed. Then stopped. The chapters were about a woman named Soo-yun. They were written differently, less controlled. The sentences were uneven, as if the distance between writer and memory had collapsed. Jiho had been 26. They had built something together, a startup that came before Quantech. Soo-yun had been his co-founder. She had also been the one who sold his source code to a competitor 3 months before launch. She was not a stranger nor a spy, but rather someone he had completely trusted and loved. It was there, even though he had tried to keep it out. In the way he described her handwriting in the margins of a shared notebook. In the quiet detail that she took her coffee the same way he did, and that he had never thought it mattered. In the way the writing faltered at the point of betrayal. As if even now, years later, his hands had not been steady on the keyboard. Linda sat very still when someone spoke. "Those aren't yours to read." She looked up. Jiho stood in the doorway. He must have returned without making a sound. His expression wasn't anger. It was something else. Linda didn't try to justify it. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." He walked in slowly. She expected him to take the pages back. He didn't. Instead, he sat down and looked out at the city. "How far did you get?" he asked. "The end of chapter 25, Linda replied. He nodded once. "Soo-yun," he said. "You don't have to explain," Linda added. "I spent 3 years thinking I was a bad judge of character," Jiho said, still looking ahead. "That was harder than losing the money. The money could be rebuilt." He paused for some few seconds before he continued. "What she took wasn't just code." Linda didn't interrupt. "I stopped letting people get close after that," he continued. "I told myself it was efficient, that I worked better alone, that distance meant clarity." He exhaled slowly. "That's why those chapters aren't in the biography," he said. "Not because I'm ashamed. Because I don't know if I'm finished with it." Linda met his gaze. "That's an honest reason." "It's the only kind I have," Jiho replied. The city outside burned quietly. Linda placed the pages face down exactly as she had found them. Then she picked up her pen, not to work, but to give him somewhere else to look if he needed it. After a moment, Jiho spoke again. "Chapter 26 explains why I built Quantech the way I did," he said. "The architecture. The refusal to use shared infrastructure. Why I trust my own servers." He glanced toward the hallway. Kelvin understood that on the first day. "He did," Linda said. "He understood it instinctively," Jiho added. A faint shift crossed his expression. "He's remarkable, Linda. You know that, right?" Linda looked toward the server room, where Kelvin's voice carried faintly. "I know," she said. Jiho picked up his pen. "I'll unlock the chapters," he said. "I'll send you the password tonight." "Only when you're ready," Linda replied. "I'm ready." He said it without emphasis. Just certainty. Linda nodded and returned to her notes. The rest of the day moved gently. Kelvin emerged from the server room around 8 p.m., energized, already talking. "You fixed it?" Linda asked. "I fixed it," Kelvin confirmed, already launching into an explanation. Jiho listened fully. Linda watched them, the billionaire and the 16-year-old, speaking across a gap that didn't seem to exist, and felt something settle in her chest. Something she wasn't ready to name. In her apartment that night, the password arrived at 11:17 p.m. There was no message, just a string of characters. Linda opened chapter 26. She read until past midnight. Chapter 26 was not long, 11 pages, but they were the kind of pages that asked something of the reader. Patience, attention, the willingness to follow a man through a landscape of loss and reconstruction without rushing him toward the part where things got better. Jiho had written about the year after Soo-yun with a precision that was almost clinical, and Linda understood now that the precision was not coldness. It was survival. A way to name each thing exactly. To account for every piece of what had broken so nothing could hide in the wreckage and ambush him later. He had built Quantech the same way. Nothing borrowed. Nothing shared. Every wall load-bearing. Linda closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to Kelvin snore lightly from the next room. Outside, Seoul was quieter at this hour, but never silent. There was always a car, always a distant train, always the city reminding you it was still there and still running without your permission. The following 4 weeks moved differently from the first 3. Something had shifted after that evening. Not dramatically, not with declarations, but in the small, persistent way things shifted when 2 people had seen something true about each other. Their work sessions kept the same structure. The same manuscript, the same annotated pages, the same coffee on the desk. Linda translated the remaining chapters within 3 to 4 days, working late to finish them. When she returned her notes on chapter 25, she added a single line at the bottom, something that was not a translation query. The writing in these chapters is the best in the book. Don't cut them. Jiho did not respond to the note directly. But the following Tuesday, he walked into the office with a second coffee mug and placed it on her side of the table without comment. Linda used it every session after that. Kelvin's game entered its final stage around the 3rd week, and the apartment took on the charged atmosphere of something nearing completion. He and Jiho occupied the dining table with printed flowcharts and handwritten logic maps. Linda would glance up from her manuscript and find them standing in identical postures, arms folded, heads tilted the same way, studying the same problem. The resemblance had nothing to do with blood. It still made her chest ache. Jiho stopped attempting Gen Z vocabulary. Linda suspected that was both progress and defeat. Kelvin, for his part, began calling him by his first name without being invited. Jiho accepted it without comment, which told her enough. On a Thursday evening in the 4th week, Kelvin closed his laptop and looked at both of them. "It's done," he said. Linda straightened. Jiho turned from his screen. "The app," Kelvin added. "It's ready to launch." There was exactly 1 second of silence. Then Linda stood, walked around the table, and pulled her son into a hug. Kelvin endured it with the long-suffering tolerance of a teenager who had not yet admitted he still needed it. Over his shoulder, Linda met Jiho's gaze. He was watching them, hands in his pockets, that familiar expression on his face. Not quite a smile, but close enough. "We're launching tonight," Jiho said. Kelvin pulled back. "Tonight? It's 8 o'clock. "Best time," Jiho replied, already moving toward his monitor. "Evening traffic on the app stores. Your target demographic is active between 8 and midnight." Kelvin glanced at Linda. She tilted her chin toward Jiho. "Go." Kelvin went. What followed was 3 hours Linda would remember with unusual clarity. Jiho walked Kelvin through every step of the launch, store listings, metadata, category selection, pricing, with the patience of someone who understood that the goal was not to show knowledge, but to transfer it. He asked questions instead of giving answers. He waited. When Kelvin got something right, Jiho said nothing. But Linda saw the small nod each time. At 11:15, Kelvin hit submit. The 3 of them sat in the living room, watching Kevin's laptop screen. The loading wheel turned. The confirmation appeared. Kelvin stared at it. Then he covered his face with his hands. "Hey," Linda said softly, placing a hand on his back. He shook his head, shoulders moving. "It's live," Jiho said, turning the laptop towards them. "There." Kelvin lowered his hands. On the screen was his game. His name, placed in the app store like it had always belonged there. KD Studios, Jiho read. "That's what you named it." "KD," Kelvin said quietly. "Kelvin Designs." "Good name," Jiho said. Kelvin glanced at him. "You think so?" "Strong. Clean. It scales." There was a pause. Then Kelvin stood abruptly. "I need air." He walked out before either of them could respond. Jiho followed. Linda followed them both. The rooftop garden opened into the night. Linda paused at the doorway. The view was different up here. The city stretched out in every direction, lit, vast, indifferent in the best possible way. There were plants, real ones, set into low stone beds. A wooden bench near the edge. Jiho sat on one of the stone borders. Kelvin stood at the railing. Linda stepped out slowly, breathing in the night air. Some moments didn't ask for anything except presence. "My father had a garden," Jiho said. Kelvin shifted slightly, listening. "Not like this," Jiho continued. "A small one. Behind our house in Suwon. He grew things he never ate. Perilla, mostly. He liked the process. He used to say the point of growing something wasn't the result. It was the proof that time had passed, and that you had been paying attention." Kelvin was quiet. "My dad left when I was 9, he said after a moment. He divorced my mother for a mistress. So, I don't really have that. The dad in his garden thing." "I know," Jiho said. "Your mother told me." Kelvin glanced back at Linda. She held his gaze. "The app is the proof," Jiho said. "That's what I mean. You've been paying attention." For 16 years. Tonight is the time passing, and you have something to show for it. Kelvin turned back to the city. He stayed quiet for a long time. Thanks, Jiho, he said eventually, voice lower than usual. Don't thank me, Jiho replied. You built it. You fixed the architecture. You understood the fix, Jiho said. That's not the same as me doing it. Kelvin nodded once. Then, after a beat, he said, I'm tired. Linda studied him. Go inside, she said gently. Sleep on the couch. He didn't argue. At the door, he paused and looked back at them. Something unreadable crossed his face. Then he went inside, the door closing behind him. Linda then walked to the railing where Kelvin had stood. He's going to be extraordinary, Jiho said, stepping beside her. I know, Linda replied. I've always known. I just needed him to know it too. You've done that, Jiho said. Without anyone. He had people, she said. You were most of them. She didn't answer that. She just kept her eyes on the city. You're good with him, she said after a moment. Better than you think. He doesn't give that kind of attention to people he doesn't respect. He respects you. Jiho didn't respond immediately. She could feel his gaze on her. Linda, he said. She turned. He was looking at her the way he had that first evening. Not calculated. Not guarded. But certain. She saw the decision before he moved. She didn't step back. His hand lifted first, careful. The back of his fingers brushed her cheek, a question without words. She answered by staying still and by meeting his eyes, and by letting everything that had built between them stand where it was. He kissed her gently. Not tentative. There was nothing uncertain in it, but careful. As if he understood the weight of what he was starting. Linda's hand rested against his shirt, fingers curling lightly into the fabric. Not pulling him closer. Just holding. When they separated, it was unhurried. She exhaled. He stayed where he was. I've been thinking about that for 4 weeks, Jiho said quietly. Only 4? Linda asked. Something shifted in his expression. Warm, unguarded, unfamiliar. Longer, he admitted. Linda looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the city, needing somewhere to place the feeling before it grew too large. Below them, Seoul continued to burn. Patient. Endless. Full of lives that were also in their own quiet ways, beginning something in the middle of an ordinary night. They stayed on the rooftop for another hour, not talking much. It was past 1 in the morning when Linda said, I should check on Kelvin. Inside, the penthouse was dim and warm. Kelvin was on the couch, fully stretched out now, one arm thrown over his face. Linda walked over, pulled a throw blanket from the armchair, and draped it over him. Jiho stayed at the entrance of the corridor, watching. Linda straightened and looked at her son for a moment. This 16-year-old who had walked into a stranger's server room weeks ago and walked out with something she hadn't known how to give him, and felt a gratitude so specific it had no name. She turned. Jiho was still watching her, his expression quiet, deliberate. The one she was beginning to understand was his way of saying things without words. He shouldn't sleep out here, Linda said softly. He'll wake up with a stiff neck. Jiho nodded once. There's a room beside the study. It's set up. Linda glanced at Kelvin, then back at him. Help me. Jiho stepped forward immediately. Together, they woke Kelvin just enough to get him moving. He murmured something incoherent, half awake, but didn't resist as Jiho steadied him by the shoulder and guided him down the corridor. This way, Jiho said quietly. Kelvin stumbled once, then corrected, letting himself be led. They reached the room, simple, clean, already prepared. Jiho pushed the door open, and Linda guided Kelvin to the bed. Lie down, she said. Kelvin obeyed without opening his eyes. Jiho pulled the duvet over him with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. Kelvin shifted once, then went still again. A minute later, they left the door slightly open. Back in the corridor, Linda exhaled. I should sleep too, she said. Jiho nodded. The guest room is ready. She looked at him. Show me the room, she said. He did. The guest room sat at the far end of the corridor. It was quiet, simply furnished. A wide bed. White linen. A window opening onto the city from a different angle. Jiho turned on the bedside lamp. Soft amber light filled the room, making it feel considered. He pointed out the towels, the switches, the small details. Then he stepped back to the doorway, hands in his pockets. There was something almost formal in it. Something careful. Good night, Linda, he said. Good night. He closed the door gently. She listened to his footsteps fade. Linda sat on the edge of the bed and covered her face with her hands. not in distress, but because the feeling was too large to hold openly, even alone. After a while, she lay down without changing, staring at the ceiling, letting everything she had been holding back surface without resistance. Eventually, she closed her eyes. She woke to the smell of coffee the following morning and the sound of soul beginning again. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she did. The memory settled quietly. She got up, found the bathroom, brushed her teeth, showered, and straightened herself as best she could before following the smell into the kitchen. Jiho stood at the counter, back to her, in a gray t-shirt and dark trousers, glasses on. A pan sat on the stove. He was making eggs. Focused enough that he didn't hear her. He turned, saw her, paused, then reached for the spatula without comment. "Coffee is ready," he said. "Thank you," she said, pouring herself a cup and wrapping her hands around it. "You cook." "I cook 3 things," Jiho said. "This is one of them." "What are the other 2? "Ramen and toast." "That's not cooking. That's surviving." "It's efficient," he said. She smiled into her coffee. Kelvin appeared at 8:30, half awake, his hair uneven. He looked at Linda, then at Jiho, then at the eggs, then back at both of them. "Did you guys stay up all night?" he asked. "No," Linda said. "Then why does it feel weird in here?" "Eat your breakfast, Kelvin." He sat, clearly filing that answer for later, and accepted the plate Jiho handed him. For a few minutes, the kitchen was quiet. Then Kelvin looked at his phone. "I have 12 downloads," he said. "Since last night." "That's 12 more than yesterday," Jiho replied. "It's not a lot." "It's the first morning," Jiho said. "The algorithm hasn't found you yet. By next week, if retention is good, you'll see growth. By next month, with the right push, you'll have a user base." Kelvin looked at him. "You really think so?" "I don't say things I don't think." Kelvin nodded slowly. Linda watched him. "You like him," he said. Linda blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Jiho." "You like him," Kelvin said plainly. Jiho went very still. "Kelvin," Linda said. "I'm not bothered," Kelvin added, eating again. "Just in case that's what's making it weird. He's based." Jiho glanced at him. Something quiet passed between them. Linda sighed. "When did you get so perceptive?" "I've always been perceptive," Kelvin said. "You just thought I was difficult." "You are difficult. I can be 2 things." He stood. "I'm checking my downloads on Jiho's monitor." He left. The kitchen fell quiet. Linda looked at Jiho. He looked back. "Based," he said. "Don't," she replied. He said it's good. "I know what it means." She was smiling. So was he, in his way. He turned toward her. There was a moment. Then his hands rested at her waist. "Linda," he said. She kissed him. This time there was no hesitation. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead briefly against his, breathing steady. "I kept telling myself it was impractical," she said. "It doesn't matter. I have a teenager. I know. He's complicated. He's exceptional." She let out a quiet laugh. "We take it slowly," she said. "I know how to be careful. That's not what worries me." He waited. "You make careful feel like not enough," she said. "Don't rush me, but don't let me retreat either." "Tell me when you're retreating," he said. "I'll tell you what I see." She nodded. From the corridor, Kelvin's voice cut in. 22 downloads. Jiho, it jumped. He stopped in the doorway. Looked at them. Looked away. "I didn't see anything," he said quickly. 22 downloads is the priority. Then he disappeared again. Linda dropped her head onto Jiho's shoulder and laughed, the sound breaking fully now. Jiho's hand came up to the back of her head, steady, warm. He didn't move, and she also didn't lift her head. They stayed like that, quiet, grounded, while the morning light spread across the kitchen and the city carried on outside, unaware and unchanged, as something new settled into place between them. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who loves a slow burn, because the best stories are better when you watch them with someone. See you in the next story.